Melisende of Jerusalem was born in the year 1105. She was the eldest daughter of the king of the Crusader state of Jerusalem, Baldwin II. Melisende's mother was Morphia, an Armenian princess, and her parents appear to have loved each other very much. Even though Morphia had only daughters and no sons, Baldwin II refused to repudiate her when he was advised to do so, and insisted that she be crowned alongside him when he became king. While most of us like to call this not being a douche, back then it was considered politically inadvisable to not have a male heir. As the oldest, Melisende was heir to the crown, and she was raised with that in mind. She was already listed on official documents during her father's rule, which shows that he was teaching her how to rule, in an age when aristocratic women's education usually consisted of sewing and reading the Bible. But since the crown was hereditary and all, Baldwin was concerned that she would need to have babies, like legitimate ones, and that nobody would take her seriously unless she was married. Medieval people, why are you so sexist? The choice of husband was left up to notoriously bad matchmaker Louis VI of France, who arranged for her to marry this guy called Fulk V, who was Count of Anjou and Maine. Fulk. I mean, it just kind of sounds like a bad guy's name. At the very least, he wasn't a very good husband. Fulk and Melisende were married in the year 1129. She was about 24 years old at the time, and he was approximately 15 years older than her, although we're not entirely sure what year he was born. Things were okay at first. Melisende had a son by the year 1130, who she named Baldwin after her father, because medieval people liked to be confusing like that. Originally, Baldwin II had promised Fulk that he would be crowned sole ruler when old Baldy died, but when Baldy was on his deathbed, he changed his mind. He instead decided to invest the crown between Melisende, Fulk, and his grandson Baldwin III, who was about 2 years old at the time, so this was mostly symbolic. Old Baldy was probably worried that Fulk would take the crown of Jerusalem, and then push Melisende and her son aside for one of his sons from his first marriage. I mean, he had good reason for this, because medieval politics were kinda like that. Fulk's own father, Fulk IV, had married 4 different women, and not because they all died. And his mother had left his father to marry the frickin' King of France, who was excommunicated for bigamy because he married Fulk's mom when he was already married to another lady. The 3 were crowned together, but then after old Baldy died, Fulk became kind of a jerk. He tried to prevent his wife from wielding any power by controlling her through his Crusader knights. This naturally didn't sit very well with Melisende's allies, or with Melisende herself, but it only got worse. In 1134, Fulk accused his wife of having an affair with a guy called Hugh II, Count of Jaffa, wherever that is, which probably wasn't at all true. He attacked Hugh's lands and wound up chasing him out of the kingdom. The Queen's supporters were not at all happy about all this accusation business, and they basically staged a coup. They reinstated all of Melisende's former powers, and Fulk couldn't do anything about it, so he just went quiet. Because that's what you do when your woman puts you in your place. By 1136 they were reconciled and they had a second son. Melisende ruled the kingdom as queen regnant, and Fulk never again overstepped his bounds. He died in a hunting accident in 1143. Melisende was supported not only by her political barons, but also by the church. She invested huge sums of money in church projects, including building an abbey where her youngest sister later became an abbess, because it helps to have relatives in high places. She also created public works projects, my favorite of which is a street in Jerusalem called Mal Cuisina, which literally means bad cooking, and was a street where pilgrims could go for a cooked meal, although apparently not a very good one. In 1144 she met up with Eleanor of Aquitaine and Louis VII of France, who were on the Second Crusade. She advised them to take the city of Aleppo, which Eleanor would have liked to do because her uncle had lands there, but Louis refused and attacked Damascus instead, and it was a complete disaster, and see my last video for more on that. Now you might remember that Melisende had a son called Baldwin III, and that little Baldy would technically have been king of Jerusalem at this time, but since he was only about 13 years old when his father died, his mother served as regent for him for some time. Little Baldy eventually came of age, and people started telling him, you shouldn't let your mommy rule your entire kingdom for you, it's your kingdom. So he decided that he wanted to be crowned, properly. He demanded that the Patriarch of Jerusalem crown him, but the Patriarch refused to do so without his mother present. So Baldy was like, fine, I'll just make my own crown. And he started running around with laurels on his head. Baldwin and Melisende put the decision to their high court, and the court decided to do the King Solomon thing and split the baby in two, except that in this case the baby was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Melisende wasn't all that happy with this decision, but she agreed to it. Baldwin, on the other hand, was furious. He besieged his mother in the city of Jerusalem. She retreated into a tower and eventually surrendered with the promise of lands and income for her retirement. Because again, medieval politics are weird, the two were reconciled within a year, and by 1153 Melisende was again serving as regent for her son, while he was off fighting. She continued to live a fairly good life, witnessing the marriage of her younger son in 1157 and the birth of her first grandchild in 1160. In 1161 she suffered a stroke from which she never recovered. She eventually died in September of that year and was buried next to her mother. She was 56 years old. Medieval historian William of Tyre, writing several decades after Melisende's reign, had this to say of the queen. She was a very wise woman, fully experienced in almost all affairs of state business, who completely triumphed over the handicap of her sex so she could take charge of important affairs. Striving to emulate the glory of the best princes, Melisende ruled the kingdom with such ability that she was rightly considered to have equaled her predecessors in that regard. That's right, ladies. Being a woman is a handicap. But when Baldy was on his deathbed, my mustache is falling off.